Welcome to Without Regret, the podcast. This podcast is for people who are looking for inspiration to overcome obstacles in life and want to see that it is possible to live your best life and become successful, whatever that means to you, regardless of your circumstances. Hear from me and my guests as we share our stories of perseverance. My name is Tamara, and I'm the host of Without Regret, the podcast.
This week, we're continuing the conversation about narcissism, only at home rather than in the workplace. We are honored to have an extraordinary guest who has emerged as a beacon of strength in the face of adversity. Meet Dana S. Diaz, a wife, mother, and best-selling author of Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. In this Can't Put It Down book, Dana outlines her journey with narcissistic abuse, which began in childhood and has woven its way throughout her life. Armed with an education in journalism and psychology from DePaul University in Chicago, Dana possesses the unique ability to articulate the intricacies of narcissistic abuse, shedding light on the confusion and conflict it inflicts upon victims. In this episode, Dana shares her personal experiences, chronicling a nearly 3-decade-long abusive marriage. Her journey from hiding a journal under the couch cushions in the basement to becoming a proud voice for victims is nothing short of inspiring. Today, she stands as an advocate for those who may be unable, afraid, or ashamed to share their own experiences. Having been a guest on over 100 podcasts worldwide, Dana strives to create awareness and understanding surrounding narcissistic abuse. As a featured speaker in a summit for healing after trauma, and with upcoming features in 2 more summits this year, Dana is dedicated to ensuring victims receive the support they need to comprehend their situations and embark on the healing process. This is Without Regret, where we bring you stories that empower, inspire, and remind you that you're not alone. Get ready for a conversation with Dana S. Diaz that sheds light on the strength born from adversity and the journey towards healing.
So a couple of reasons I'm so excited to talk to you. One, my boyfriend's last name is Diaz, but sounds like you're not Diaz anymore now.
No, Diaz is actually my birth name,
Okay.
my last name, but
Gotcha.
I've had 4 last names in my life and they've all been associated with narcissists. So I just thought, I just want to go back to being me. So that's what we did.
Totally understand.
But that is very cool. There's a lot of us out there though.
Yes. And are you Cuban?
Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican. Okay. My boyfriend is Cuban. So.
Okay. Yeah.
The second reason though is because I did read your book.
Oh, cool.
And
thank you.
Wow. You're welcome. You're a fantastic writer.
Thank you so much.
I was completely enthralled. Many times I was like, I need to put this book down and get something done or go to sleep or whatever. And I couldn't put the book down. I was just
oh
like,
my gosh,
what's going to happen next? When are we going to get out of this? And
that's what everybody says. I've even had people message me and say that like they took a day. I had 2 people take a day off of work and I'm like, no, go to work. The book will be there.
I read
it. It's okay.
I was reading it at work. I have to admit. And then there were other times though that I just had to take a break from it because it's so much. It's so intense and it was affecting me, like really affecting me.
I'm so sorry.
A testament to your writing, I think, though, about how good it is,
Well, thank you. I took my time with that one because I thought it was really important to get, not just beneath the surface, but really just go places that most people don't want to go.
Right.
Because it's not always nice. And it's not even the thoughts that went through my head at times. Right. They weren't pretty. They weren't acceptable even to me, but it's what it was. And I wanted to be real and authentic.
You were very real and very authentic. But on top of that, I think you did such a great job of explaining and making someone understand why you couldn't get out. All the things tried, all the times you thought, okay, this is it. And then something would happen. And it just goes to show how hard it truly is to get out of the situation. Because people are always like, why don't you just leave? Why?
I know. Like you're just going to get up and walk out the door. But that's the thing. You read the book, even after I did finally get my divorce. Believe me, there's about 1,000 pages that didn't make it in the book. So I always tell people, if you like the book, I almost need to make a separate book called The Outtakes, just because there's so many other stories. But you know, that was the thing about it, was like, I got out, and then, you know, my son was really upset that we got divorced. And I'm like, well, believe me, dude, nothing has changed. Like, the relationship is still there. We're just financially divided. But, you know, everything that happened after, I mean, it took a while. And even now, I mean, we have no contact, but he can still affect me without even being near me. You know, it's weird.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've read the book, but the listeners haven't.
Okay.
So let's talk about, if you have what is your definition of a narcissist? I think I kind of want to start there, because as I was reading the book, there were certain attributes that I could attribute to both of my I have two ex-husbands myself. And the first one, my daughter's father, I think was probably way more on that level of a narcissist than my second husband. But there were certain aspects though that I could see in books that I could relate to with him. But at the end of the day, I was like, there was never any real effort to control me or my life, I guess. So I don't know. I'm just,
here's how I explain it to the rest of the world. There's two different ways I explain it to get the point across. You know, what is a narcissist is a loaded question, because, you know, depending what you read and who you talk to, there's 5 different kinds, 14 different kinds, who knows? Mm-hmm. We just all know they need to feel superior, and you know, they love the entitlement, you know, that they get from that feeling of authority or whatever. But what is a narcissist? So people can have narcissistic qualities and not be a narcissist. So I liken it to when you go to the doctor and you say, I have a sniffly nose and a scratchy throat, and, you know, you name off all these symptoms, those same exact set of symptoms. It could be strep throat, it could be the flu, it could just be a bacterial infection, it could be all these different things. So just because I avoid the, you know, give us a list of red flags or what are the things, I don't list the characteristics out or describe them, because like a cold, you could have all the symptoms and not be one. So I think it's better to describe it like a tumor. You could have a benign tumor and a malignant tumor. The benign tumor is there. It shouldn't be there, but it is, but it's not bothering you. It's just there. You can take it or leave it. The malignant tumor is going to cause you a lot of problems, and it might even kill you, literally. So you want to remove it. You need to cut it out of your life. So in the same respect, we have narcissists that they're not called benign, but they're narcissists. And these are people that even I have in my life that I love very, very much. And she looks as good as she thinks she does. So I cannot hate on her at all. You know, she's very into herself, but you know what? Call it a really, really healthy self-esteem, whatever it is, but she is not hurting anyone with it. So when we're talking about malignant narcissists, which is a type of narcissist, these are the people that comprise 20% of the prison population in the US. These are the people that, like in my book, my ex-husband, and unfortunately, if you watch 2020 or 48 Hours, any of these shows, boy, every single time my husband will look over at me and said, God, you know, it sounds like I'm like, I know, we call that the N-word around here, but those malignant narcissists are the ones that you have to watch out for, because yes, they will have whatever characteristics, but they are intentionally trying to cause harm. They are gaining a fulfillment in their ego with the sense of control and power and authority they have over that person that they're targeting. But they are sick. They do it in a very sick and disgusting way that basically completely diminishes the person whom they've targeted, which is usually some sort of romantic spouse, you know, or a partner in some way.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So yeah, then let's tell your story, as I'm sure you have your quote unquote elevator pitch. I want a little bit more than that, but you know.
Yeah, I really don't. Honestly, no? Okay. I don't know what I'm going to say any more than you do. It's just whatever comes. I just like to keep it fresh. Whatever it is that comes out of my mouth, it is. So
well, let's start with your mother. and that relationship, because I think that lays the groundwork, just like it did in the book, of why you were susceptible like you were.
Yes. That's a big one. There's a lot there even. I'm actually working right now as we speak, as of a few minutes ago before we got on the prequel to Gasping for Air, which is about my childhood. And even now that I'm about to turn 48, everything in my life seems to come back to what I call the mother wound. So my mother got pregnant when she was 16 with her boyfriend. I was born on her 17th birthday. We have to remember this was during a time when it was not okay. It was not socially acceptable for a teenage girl to be pregnant, never mind actually have a baby. So she had me, but she had her tubes tied immediately after I was born. So I think that's pretty good evidence that she didn't want children at all. So here I was. She was very clear that she didn't want me. I mean, it was even spoken around me as far back as I can remember. Like in my memories, it was normal conversation for me to hear that I wasn't wanted, that I was an accident. I felt like a burden and a bother to everybody except my great grandma and my grandma. My two grandmas decided when my mother was having me, they were not going to let her adopt me out. They were not going to have their only grandchild and great grandchild, the very first one, raised by some strangers. They wanted to keep me in the family. So my grandma said she would get a job. Great grandma said she would take care of me while grandma worked to pay for me. So I was actually pretty happy at that point, for those first, 5 years of my life or so. I knew my mother and everybody referred to her as my mother, but I slept at my great grandma's apartment. My great grandma was the one that clothed me, fed me, rocked me when I was crying, put the Band-Aids on my boo-boos, soothed me when I was upset. She was my mother by all sense of any kind of knowledge that I had based on what I saw on the soap operas she would watch and the kids' cartoons I would see. So I had that normalcy, at least in the first very beginning of my life. But when my mother decided to go and get married, I don't know whose idea it was, but somewhere in the realm of the family, they decided that it was right for my mother to now take me, now that she was marrying an older man that had a house in the suburbs and the whole thing. So I do have a very terrible memory of when I was taken from my great grandma's apartment. I didn't want to leave. I screamed, I begged, I pleaded, I would do anything to stay with her, because if you can imagine, it was like a child being taken away from his mother, or her mother. So I said his because I was thinking in my mind of that story in the news. Gosh, it was probably been 20 years of that little boy, Richard, that had been adopted, and he was being taken away from the only family he'd ever known to go back. He was given back to his biological parents. And that just hit my soul hard, because I felt for that little boy. So there I was, somewhere around that age, 5, 6 years old. Now I'm living in the suburbs, away from the city of Chicago, and the only family I've ever known, with this man that my mother decided she was marrying, and I didn't like him. He smiled. He gave me stuffed animals. He was always squeezing me and kind of playing that role, like he was so thrilled to fill that father role for me when we were with other people. But in the house, it was different. And if we were in the house and my mother wasn't there, then it was really, really different. I didn't know what a narcissist was back then, but definitely, anybody that understands Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or when somebody puts that mask, that facade on, that's what I was experiencing. And I knew it wasn't right. It was very clearly wrong to me, but he was left in charge of me in the mornings, and that's whenever usually things would happen. It started off little. My mother left for work very early, so he was supposed to get me to school. It was little things, just constant criticism, but overly critical. Like he would tell me, and again, remember, I'm maybe 6 years old, and telling me that the toast I was eating for breakfast was going to make me fat. That the peanut butter jelly sandwich that I was making myself for my lunch for school was going to make me fat. I mean, the body image thing started right away. And that is abusive, to do that to a little girl who's just trying to make a darn sandwich to take to school for lunch.
She shouldn't even have to be making it herself at that age.
At that age, I know, but he sat in it was like his throne at the kitchen table, dictating to everybody what they should do and how they should be, and so on and so forth. But then it grew into, and from that point on into my teenage years, it got into, me talking back to him. But because I was standing up for myself, I would, you can't talk to me that way. You're not my dad. You're not in charge of me. Typical things a child would say. That would be met with, him grabbing my wrist or my arm too hard, but like gripping it tightly in a cruel manner to where it would leave hand marks. That was the little stuff that developed and grew into, once I remember picking up the phone to call my mother to tell her what was going on, and he took the phone and started beating me over the head. Other times, I've always had this long hair. He would grab me by the back of my hair, bang my head against the wall. I would then have to use my hair to cover my head and my face to make sure nobody saw the bruises. Because when they did see the bruises at school, then I was called out of my classroom, had to go to the nurse's office where she would pull out the little sheet of paper that had a general outline of a body. And then I had to go through the shame and humiliation of having to roll up my sleeves and my pants legs and anything else and show her any other marks that I had on my body that might be of concern. And then, of course, I was asked what happened, and I would make things up. I tripped. I fell into a door. I accidentally knocked myself in the head. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't see that there. I wasn't going to expose him because I knew I would just go home and face more of it. So I learned to keep my mouth shut, even though everything in me was telling me to fight and stand up for myself, because my mother wasn't. Mm-hmm. My mother, I did go to her. She was supposed to be my mother. So I would go to her and say, he's saying these things, he's doing these things. And she would just dismiss it. No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do that. Other times she would say that, oh, well, I talked to him and he said that that's not true. So you must be lying to get attention. It was always turned into something. But all the while this physical stuff was happening, there was also the verbal abuse. And again, going back to about 6 years old, every single day, I heard these things play. I'm going to be 48 next month, and these things still play in my head like a tape. Nobody ever wanted you. Nobody ever loved you. I shouldn't have to pay for another man's child. You should be more grateful that I give you food and clothing and shelter. What else? I mean, it's just all these terrible. I mean, if you can imagine saying those things to a little girl, nobody ever wanted you. Nobody's ever going to love you. I mean, how am I supposed to feel? I knew it was wrong. It felt wrong. And thank God that I had a foundation, at least with my great grandma, that I knew what love was. And I knew this wasn't it, but it was like, I won't say the F word, but it's like mind effing somebody when you're saying in one sentence, I love you, and I'm getting birthday cards and love mom and dad. But then these things are being told to me, and the mistreatment, and then my mother's calling me a liar. And as I developed into my teen years, I did get mouthier because I was bigger and I could stand up to him more face to face. He was a short, stocky thing. So, I would tell him, don't talk to me that way. You have no right to speak to me that way. I called him a few names I probably shouldn't have, cuss words that wouldn't be, appropriate in any situation between a parent and a child. But I was angry and I had it bottled up inside of me. And nobody was fighting for me except for me. Nobody. So I did. I had these outbursts. So then it turned into this narrative. I'd hear them telling family, like even at Christmas, and I'm like right there, they would be talking about, oh, she's so difficult, or, oh, she's so sensitive. We can't, count on anything she says. She makes these things up to get attention. But that also turned into, they created a narrative about my mental stability, that I wasn't just difficult. They thought I had mental problems and I needed therapy. And I mean, I think they started believing it themselves, because then they did start forcing me to go to therapy. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can talk to this person and talk some sense into them, and let them know what's going on, because I, knew enough at that point I was old enough, maybe 13 or so, 14, 15, somewhere around there, where I understood there was client-patient confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain restrictions of what she could share. So I did tell her what was going on. And, they put me through the typical psychological baloney of drawing a picture of the family and all this and that. And I was too old to fall for the trick of it. So I'm like, I don't know what you want me to draw. Like I I'm not 5 anymore.
Right.
But I was trying to be honest with this woman. And unfortunately, I learned after that very first session with her that I guess they were paying for the session. So she was on their side. She told them everything that I said about them. And that just turned almost into more proof for them, because, they sat there. They always reminded me, I hate going off on these tangents, but anybody who's my age that remembers the original movie Annie, when Rooster and Lily are sitting there with these sad eyes and looking so forlorn,
Mm-hmm.
because they were just so distraught that their daughter Annie, had been given to this orphanage, and they were there to claim her and take her back because they loved her so much. Literally, that was my mother and stepfather. And it was so frustrating to see through it, but everybody bought it. Everybody bought it. It was just easier to believe that I was lying, and that it even got to the point where they were saying that I was self-inflicting the wounds on my body. So then fast forward to when I was 17 and 16, 17, I again bottled up, and I would just get so frustrated. It would just erupt out of me. One night they're laying in bed, and it wasn't even that late at night, that hour that we all kind of just lay around in bed till we fall asleep. And I just came out of my room, went to their bedroom, and I said, why the hell don't you care about me? Why can you not love me? I just don't understand. And that just blew up into one of the worst nights of my life. I was attacked by both of them. One of them held me down on the ground. The other straddled me, slapped me, punched me. It basically turned into a wrestling match. And by this time they had their own child. My mother had gone through about 14 years of reversal tubal ligation. So because he had to have his own child, biological.
Yeah, I was wondering when you said she had her tube side, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
She had a brother. Okay.
Yeah. Well, he came after 14 or 15 miscarriages and 14 years after me, because the reversal tubal ligation, it's a process, and one that obviously wasn't perfected. She went through a lot of procedures, but finally carried a fetus to term. And that was my brother. He was about 2 years old. And I will never in my life forget laying on the floor in the hallway, being held down, straddled, beaten, while he was jumping up on the bed, joyfully, happily, just having a good time in our parents' bedroom watching cartoons. And he would glance down at me in the hallway. We made eye contact, and I was just being beaten while he was jumping on the bed happily. It was just so... I'd always felt insignificant and worthless, but that was the point that I felt like I really was nothing. So that night ended with me being strangled by my mother. And I thought I was going to die because I started blacking out. And I couldn't get her hands off of my neck. I didn't have the strength, but I realized, thank God that I could kick her. So I used my legs to kick her in the stomach. She had just had another kind of procedure, but, thank God, because I kicked her in the stomach and she let go. But in letting me go, she threw me down a half flight of stairs and I just got up and ran out the door. I just ran. I didn't even know where I was going. It was nighttime. It was a weeknight, but I just ran. I had to get away from there. I ended up that night. It's not funny at all, actually. Somebody that I knew from school was driving down a street and saw me, and she stopped and said, what in the world are you doing out here? And then she saw my face and my body, and she's like, oh my gosh, let me take you somewhere. And I had a very good friend that I was friends with since, second grade. So I went to her house. And that was it. I mean, nobody asked any questions. I don't know why people are so scared. I wish somebody would have asked me what was wrong or called the police. But the next day at school, the teachers alerted the police. I was not allowed to go to class the way I looked. They actually pulled me out of class and had the cops come talk to me and the school counselor come talk to me. And I told them the truth about everything. And it just made me sad because I asked, who called you? Did my mother call the police after I left the home last night? No, nobody called my mother. It just kills me that they just went to bed that night, put my brother to sleep, went to bed like any other night, not even caring that I could have been out on the streets all night or something could have happened to me. But again, they went with this narrative that, I was difficult and I had mental problems. I mean, yes, was I anxious and depressed and hypervigilant and struggling to find the will to live every day? Yeah, given the situation I was, and I'm not ashamed of that because that's what was done to me. It wasn't anything that made me deficient as a person. But either way, the cops took me to the station. My mother and stepfather were there. And once again, child services came in and said they did an investigation, obviously not a very long or a very diligent one, but they had felt it was sufficient to interview some neighbors and interview the people that my mother and stepfather had working for them at their business. And of course, everybody said that my mother and stepfather were wonderful people. They were generous. They were charitable. Who's going to say anything bad, especially the people working for them? But they probably, they had a different relationship with them too. They weren't the daughter that wasn't wanted. So,
right.
It's a whole different situation because my brother to this day would tell you that he has the best parents that ever could be. I beg to differ, and they're the same people. So I was given the option of going back home or, they'd have to figure out something else. There was a girl from school, the same girl that had found me when she was driving on the street the night before. She'd told her mother what happened. Her family was willing to take me in and even take guardianship of me. That would have been nice. I didn't know them well, but it would have been nice just to be somewhere where somebody wanted me at all. My parents had to sign off on that. They would not. My mother and stepfather would not agree to that. So then I had a teacher at school. He'd always known there was something going on, and I was able to talk to him sometimes, and even his wife would come see him for lunch sometimes, and she had taken a liking to me too. And so I did confide in them, and they were also willing. They had no children, and, they were just wanting to help me. But again, my mother and stepfather would have to sign off, and they would not sign off. I had to go home with them. And I said to the policeman, I refused to go back to that house. And I said, and by the way, where is my brother? And they said, well, what does that have to do with anything? And I said, well, after, I mean, look at me, after what they did to me, you left my brother there. He's 2. I'm usually the one that has to protect him from when he's bad, and my stepfather is going to spank him. But the spankings were more than just spankings. They were brutal.
So and even on him at 2, he was rougher than necessary.
Oh, very much. I threw my body between them. Sometimes I cussed at him just to distract him and get the brunt of it so my brother would be spared. Yeah, I was very protective over my brother. Honestly, I had fantasies that I could maybe somehow save enough babysitting money to just take my brother and just run and go start somewhere fresh, raise him, without them altogether. I mean, that's how desperate I was to get myself and him out of the situation. But either way, what ended up happening that day is that the only thing my parents would agree to was to admit me to a mental institution. So I said, that's fine. Take me there, because I'm not going back to that house. There's no way. So I was taken there. And the irony, well, I shouldn't say because it's all in the book. Okay, well, I already opened my mouth. The book isn't out till next summer, so maybe everybody will forget.
Yes.
So the next morning, my first morning in this mental facility for, juveniles. By the way, my roommate there was a 12-year-old girl who had stabbed her friend to death. So I was sharing a room with a murderer. Like, I had enough trauma in my life to deal with. I wasn't sleeping, obviously. But my first morning there, I go into the breakfast room. It's literally what you imagine, what you see in the movies, where there's just one open community room where everything happens. That's where you eat. That's where you socialize. That's where you are. So I go in there and I see a kid from my school. He had pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth about a month before that. Nobody had heard from him. Nobody could get a hold of him. Nobody knew where he was or what happened. There he was. And so, I went over to him and I said all this. Where have you been? Everybody's been wondering. He says, I've been locked up in here. He said, my mother is, an alcoholic, and I was trying to prevent her from hurting herself one night, but she called the cops and said I was physically assaulting her, and she had me admitted in here. And it's not funny at all, but it made me feel better to know that, we lived in a pretty wealthy suburb. So it was nice to know that I wasn't the only one who had to suffer because our parents had a few bucks and could do whatever they want with us as punishment. Because most people would just ground their children or maybe not talk to them for a day. No, our parents locked us up in mental institutions because that was, I guess, the thing to do in the 90s. So it was comforting to have somebody there that was fairly normal, and that I could at least relate to, because there were so many other teenagers there that did have actual, things that they had to deal with. So it was very hard. And he was only there a few days before he was released. But, I had to fare it on my own after that. And fortunately, I think all the staff there saw that I wasn't, harmful to anybody. I was not violent. I was not this, idea that they had been given about me. So I was favored in a way, because I was the kid they could actually just have a normal conversation with. And so they allowed me little things, that they didn't allow the other kids. But it was still an awful month that I had to stay there until the insurance ran out and stopped paying for it. But then where did I have to go? Home.
Back home.
Yeah.
Did anything change at all?
No, but that's about when I just started counting down the days. When I was 18, I knew I was going to leave. I was definitely made to feel more unwelcome at that point. My stepfather being a covert or an overt narcissist, he was very direct about how he felt. So he was constantly calling me a whore. He was still criticizing what I ate and how I looked, you know, and just the physical stuff wasn't as bad after that, because I think now that it was kind of out there, you know, even though they had dodged the bullet that time, he didn't want to risk me saying anything or going out in the world with bruises, but he made sure. I mean, sometimes I'd be ignored for 3 weeks straight.
Which was probably great for you. You were probably
it wasn't because the silent treatment, I mean, it's a military tactic that they use on war prisoners. It can really mess with you. I mean, again, that feeling of insignificance and unworthiness, it just makes you feel that much worse about yourself. So, you know, definitely he started throwing around comments. I mean, I think I know he wanted me out, you know, as soon as I was 18 as well. I mean, because his only obligation was, you know, to take care of me as a minor. And once I was 18, I would be legally an adult, but that was fine with me. And that's what I did on my 18th birthday. I walked out the door. They were my mother and I having the same birthday. There was cake for her. They were having a little party for her in the kitchen. Nobody had told me about it. I was upstairs in my room. Nobody invited me down to have cake with them. They had cake for my mother. And I looked at the cake as I walked out the door, and it only said happy birthday with my mother's name on it, not mine. So I just said, okay.
On your 18th birthday, which should be a big deal. It's a milestone birthday.
Wow. Yeah, but I wasn't a big deal. I wasn't, I didn't mean anything to these people.
You are a big deal, though,
Dana. I knew it.
You are a big deal.
I don't know about that, but I know I deserved better than that.
Right. You definitely, everybody does, but you definitely did. That's so, whew. And now I'm going to read that book, and I will. I'll read anything you write.
You'll read anything I write. I don't know if I can top Gasping for Air, though. That did come out good.
Well written. You know what I mean? Like, it really is. I mean, it could have been, you know, I've read some other memoirs. Actually, I'm reading Britney Spears' memoir right now, too.
I know, that's on my list.
And yours is
talk about a narcissist. Not Britney, but her dad. My goodness.
Britney might have some tendencies there too. I'm actually I've been a huge Britney fan forever. We don't need to talk about Britney. Anyway, that's a whole other subject.
That is a whole other subject.
So now you're out on your own. So I think this is kind of where your book starts, with a little bit of, whatever.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I was wondering, and if you go into in the book and don't want to elaborate now, that's fine. But like, where were your grandmother and great grandmother through all this? How come they never stepped in?
Well, they lived in the city. That's where I was born and raised with my great grandma. But when my mom got married, this guy that she married lived out in the suburbs, and it was just away from everyone and everything we knew.
So they just didn't know.
They didn't really know. We would go there sometimes on Sundays, and I did kind of bring it up once, to my great grandma, because she was, like I said, my mother for all purposes. But you have to remember, and it might be a cultural thing, but coming from Puerto Rico, the women are very strong and very loud and speak their mind. I will say that about us, at least in our family. But there is still a certain respect you hold for the men. The men and the children come first. And even if the man is wrong, I don't want to call it submission, because believe me, especially in my family, the woman will always tell, and I'm guilty of it too, we'll always tell the men if they're wrong, even our own husbands. But you still defer. There's a certain level of respect that you defer to them. So my great grandma would just tell me basically to lay low, and just, she said not to speak up too much, because she said, if I speak too much and defend myself too much, then nobody's going to hear me. So she said, just stay quiet, respect your mother's wish to be with this man, even if you don't like him. And just, she kind of also impressed upon me that I need to learn to take care of myself anyway. She said, because nobody's ever going to be there for you till the end of your life. So you need to learn to take care of yourself so that you are independent and you don't need anybody. And I will say that's what she kind of worked on with me when I would talk to her as I was growing up, is just to take care of my own responsibilities. Don't rely on anybody for anything. And I'm still very much that way. It's hard for me to ask for help or to ask anyone to help me in anything. I always dreaded, even in college, doing those projects where they group you or pair you with somebody, because I'm like, no, I just want to do it by myself. I want to be a team player, but no. Yeah, I didn't do sports. I ran cross country because it's every man for himself, So I'm like I'm a solo woman. I'm a one woman show. So that was her advice to me. But no, anybody in any kind of victim circumstance, you're so deathly afraid of what the consequences would be if they found out. Even all my little friends, I stopped having them over because they would witness the hostility and the tension. And my stepfather was just mean, even to them. But he'd never laid a hand on them, but just verbally, he was a jerk, so nobody wanted to be around him. So I couldn't even have friends over, so eventually, even as a kid and a teenager, I just kept more to myself. I had a couple friends, but it was just easier that way, because then I didn't have to worry about slipping and saying something or having to explain something on my body or have to explain a mood I was in or a funk. You know what I mean? I just basically locked myself in my bedroom and I had music, I listened to a lot of music. You read Gasping for Air, so the chapter titles are all song titles.
Yes, I did
and
notice
the playlist is on YouTube. And
that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, YouTube Music has the playlist. So, songs and music became really important to me because they were able to express that for me, whatever mood I was in. The lyrics, like even now, I'm the oldest Swiftie fan that ever was, I swear to God. But Taylor Swift,
I'm older than you and I'm a Swiftie.
Okay, well, high five. We'll have to go to a concert next time she's on tour. But the way she crafts, honestly, anybody that doesn't realize her artistry, the way she crafts words together in them is just unbelievable to me. But I found that with a lot of different artists. And, when I was little, it started out with just the Beatles and even, I hate to say, ABBA. I loved ABBA,
I love ABBA to this day.
I know, right?
I had an ABBA poster on my wall when I was a kid.
That's great.
I don't think I knew who they were yet, but I had the poster.
That's phenomenal. But yeah, you see, that's the beauty of music, though, and it connects people. And I think that we connect with the music and it connects us to the artist and it connects us with each other. And so I had that. And so I joined orchestra because playing my little viola in the midst of, all these other people playing instruments, I felt a connection that I was missing out on in my home life. It gave me some sense of being a part of something, belonging. And I didn't have that because, again, my stepfather had always said, you're not part of this family. It's just me and your mom and your brother. You're not part of our family. There was always this division. So, I had certain things, but yeah, it's unfortunate that I went out in the world thinking I'm never going to let this happen again. Never, ever, ever. And the sad thing is that, yes, when my ex-husband, well, he wasn't my husband then, but when this young man walked into where I worked, walked into my life, I didn't like him at all. He was no Brad Pitt that I could even say like, ooh, ah. He was nothing special and he was a jerk. And I just thought he felt entitled to my servitude. And I just remember thinking, no, sir, you're not all that. And I'm not interested. No, thank you. But at the same time, when he did express, some interest, I always liken it to being like when you're holding a treat in front of a dog and the dog is like shaking because it just wants that treat so bad. That's how I felt inside. We call that desperate as if it's a bad thing, and maybe it's not a nice thing to be, but it is what it is. I had not had the fortune of having two loving parents growing up. I had not had the fortune of having siblings with which I was close with to replace the love my parents didn't give me. I was starving and desperate for somebody to give me that love and attention.
Yeah.
You
so
know,
he expresses that interest in the note on your door, and you just like, this person likes
I was
me.
like, let me get down there. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
even think in that instant that I'm standing there in my pajama, my long plaid muumuu, because it was winter and it was cold.
Well, I don't want to say what happened that night.
I know. But you can understand now, knowing this tidbit, that we'll have to let everyone read the book. But what happened that night was not something I wanted to happen, but it felt nice to have somebody want me even in that way.
Yeah, but even before that happened.
Even before that, he was
thing that he did, and I don't want to give it away.
I know.
I was just like, I honestly thought when I first started reading the book and I got to that part, I was like, oh, this guy's just a blip in the story. This isn't going to go anywhere, right? This is just one example.
Yeah, because no normal girl would go for that.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I get it. Cause I mean, you're talking about this man and how you didn't like him and how he was no Brad Pitt. And I'm like, this is my first ex-husband, like through and through. He dated my sister. I could not stand him. I was like, you need to get rid of this guy. And I had a boyfriend at the time I was madly in love with, and then we broke up. And so now I'm vulnerable. Oh, no. I don't even know how I ended up in because my sister had broken up with him. And I don't know how I ended up seeing him or engaging with him, but we became like buds, and he was kind of there for me in that time when I was literally I dated this man for a year and 4 months. I thought we were going to get married. I'm 18, but I thought we were going to get married, whatever. 6 months later, I was literally married to my first ex-husband. Wow. So thankfully, I only stayed for 2 years, long enough to have my child. And that was it for me. That's when I was like, nah, I can't stay in something like this with a child. But I was fortunate enough to be able to go back to my mom and be with my mom, because I didn't have that upbringing. I was very much loved.
See, and that's what
helped me with the self-esteem to know better than to put up with his bullshit.
And that's the circumstance that I found, because we were saying before, people don't understand why you don't just get up and leave. And, I always struggled with feeling like, am I using somebody, or am I caring for myself, or do I care about them? Because the problem was, he had me moved in, within 6 weeks or something. And, it all moved very fast, but as much as I wanted to get out, I just, there was always that, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Yeah. And, because I didn't have that. And I just, it was so hard for me to be alone. And I can look back and say, okay, that, there's a lot of codependency going on there. But what a perfect storm, if you think about it. A people-pleasing codependent who's starving for love, being handed over basically on a silver platter to a narcissist who wants, who says, this is how it's going to be. And if you want me to give you love and affection, this is what you have to do. I mean, boy, that just...
And I don't mean to discount your situation at all, but I do think that it's unfortunate that it's probably a really common thing. I feel like, and I don't even know if maybe you even said it in the book, but you can insert person A and person B here, and it's the same stories over. Or somebody else maybe that I was talking to said that, oh no, it was somebody else. Oh, that's what it is. There's a woman that I am going to be doing a podcast with, and she and I were discussing, she's focuses on narcissism in the workplace,
okay,
bosses and stuff like that. And she has done this research and talked to people in relationships too, not just in the workplace, but that's basically what she was saying. It's just it's a pattern of behavior that
absolutely,
it's very much the same things over and over. She's in her research and interviewing and talking to all these people, it's That's what she was saying. She's like, basically insert this person and that person, but it's the story's the same.
And it's very sad because it's so sad to me. That's why I get, I don't know how to take it when somebody reaches out, which happens all the time, and says, oh, I can relate. It's like, you told my story in this book. And, or, it's like, okay, well, I'm glad, because I want you to know you're not alone, because I wished I would have known I wasn't alone. But at the same time, I don't want anyone to know that what this feels like and what it is to be a victim of these circumstances. But, you get caught up in it. I'm just hopeful that, there's more people that can relate to the lesser aspects of being with a narcissist, because not that gaslighting and manipulation and these things aren't awful in themselves. They can cause a person a lot of physical and mental damage. But there are narcissists that go to extremes, which, I also experienced the financial abuse.
Right.
There was a little sprinkle of sexual abuse in my marriage. And then the domestic violence, gets to the most severe part. And some people don't survive that to tell their story at all or to relate to anybody. So, it is definitely something to be aware of. But like I always say, it doesn't even matter if it's a narcissist. We're talking about bullies on the school playground. We're talking about people that are just nasty and mean, the mean girls in high school and whatever, or at work. Anybody who intentionally sets out to harm another human being is a problem. And these are the people you need to steer clear of, and not fall into their lair, so to speak.
I think narcissism, I guess, technically that malignant narcissism that you mentioned is it's a personality disorder, or is it a mental disorder? I mean, it's something you're born with, right? It's not.
You hear me sighing. So there's a couple different aspects of that. Number one, I'll leave the narcissistic personality disorder alone, just because in order to diagnose somebody with this, they have to actually go somewhere to get diagnosed. Right. But tell me a narcissist that thinks there's something wrong with them. So I'm not sure, we can really go anywhere with that. But I mean, there's a lot of them out there. They're everywhere. We definitely have to deal with them. And like I said before, 20-some%, of the prison population are supposedly narcissists, these malignant narcissists. But I don't know about how they're actually created. I know what I think. There's two schools of thought on that, though. And one is that it's genetic, that they're born with it. I am not completely sold on that, but I know people who are. But then again, I also know people that there are a lot of people who think they're aliens, and, I just can't even go there. I'm sure there's life out there. I'm not disputing that, but I don't think that narcissists are really aliens from another planet. My school of thought that I subscribe to is more because we're in this nature versus nurture kind of thing. I'm more on the nurture side. From my experience, the narcissists that I have dealt with, and there have been many, they have either, for example, one that I'm thinking of right now, which is in the sequel to Gasping for Air, that
the
I'm
sequel,
also,
not the prequel. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm doing two books at once because I'm that ambitious. I'm a little bit of that crazy. I keep getting accused of being. So in the sequel, I talk about this particular narcissist. I wholeheartedly believe she is one of those that was just overly inflated growing up, because I actually do know her parents as well. And I know a couple other circumstances that I've seen this in that had, where narcissist was created just by we all try to encourage and uplift our children, but some people go a little too far with that and make their children actually, feel and differentiate them even in the classroom and with other kids, that they are special and that they get special treatment. And when you do this over and over, this child actually does think that they are better than everyone else and more deserving and more entitled. And I think that's one way that narcissists are created. And the other way is more like where my stepfather and ex-husband fall into, where they are either abused or neglected in their own childhood. Now, my ex-husband, interestingly, was not, I can firmly say that he was not abused physically or even verbally or any, but in his mind, he was neglected because he was held in a lower status, so to speak, than his sister, who had been from his mother's previous deceased husband. So when they feel that, just that deep-seated inferiority and insecurity, I think sometimes they seek to fulfill their ego by controlling and overpowering another human being so that they can feel important, and feel, you know, they kind of exalt themselves, as opposed to the first example where other people are exalting them, and so they begin to believe it. But it's true, because just like in my childhood, that I actually, you know, for 40 years of my life thought that I really was insignificant and nothing. And, you know, I mean, when this is what you hear every day from the people around you, you become it. And I think those are the two ways. That's what I believe. But again, genetics, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. There's supposedly evidence to support it, but we can probably find evidence to support just about anything. So who knows? Who knows? And honestly, for me, I don't even care what it is, because they're here and they're causing damage however they were made. I think the idea of wanting to know where they came from and how they, you know, come to be the way they are is to prevent it. But I'm not sure that, I mean, to prevent it is just to, you know, try to start in the home. And what are you going to do if it's genetic? You know, sterilize half the population? I mean, it's just not realistic. So
yeah, very true. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is, but on the flip side, on your end, on the end of the person who is entrapped by this narcissist, what do we do? What is the message to that person? Like, do you look back ever? I'm sure you look back and go, what the hell was I thinking? Maybe I could have gotten out here. Or I could have gotten out there. I
had a lot of exit points. Yeah.
You know? But this podcast is called Without Regret, because we can't look back on those things, because we can't go back and change them. Those things happened. And you know what? We learn a lesson from them. They make us who we are today. And I think you're pretty freaking awesome today.
Thank you.
You know, you can't go back and change it. So you might as well it.
And I don't regret it. I mean, I am at the point, and I will say this just so people understand, this isn't something that happened 10 years ago. It's only been 3 short years since the last
really
violent incident with my ex, which happened after the divorce, as you know from reading.
How long since the divorce?
3 years and a couple months.
Okay.
And then we had some incidences. It took a while even to get him off the property, but yeah. So, I mean, I am very newly out of the situation, but I want to say that absolutely I don't have regret. And I'm not going to say this in a snarky way, because it's not meant snarky, but my ex-husband, I don't think I would ever go back. Like people say all the time, oh, if you could go back and talk to your 19 or 20-year-old self. No, I would not warn her or do anything. I would just tell her it's going to be okay, because I honestly, wholeheartedly believe I went through my childhood. I went through this terribly abusive marriage. But in the middle of that, I graduated from college with a degree in journalism, and I minored in psychology. And I had always, since I was like 12, 13 years old, wanted to find a way to help then it was kids like me to get out of abusive situations. I wanted to find a way to help people at all that had been victims of abuse. So having gone through all that, I had kept this record in my, marriage before. It was our last year that we were married in 2020, right before we went into COVID. I was scared because he was getting very violent, and I was worried for my life. So I started keeping a notebook of the things that were happening in the house, kept it under the cushion in the basement couch where I was staying. And I ended up writing those experiences out during COVID because I had a lot of time on my hands. And it ended up being a book. I published a book. I never thought in a million years I would publish Gasping for Air. So, and now I'm going to have 2 more books out next year. So I couldn't have done that if I hadn't gone through all that stuff. So I'm not standing here trying to be noble and say, oh, I had to go through it so I could accomplish my dreams. But really, my ex-husband made my dreams come true. I am a published author. He gave me my son, who I am not sure how he came out of it as unscathed as he did, but he is a phenomenal young man. You know, he's 20. He can be snarky, but I love him. He's very mature for his age, which makes me a little sad, but he's a good human being. And that's what means the most to me. You know, he's that kid that's going to help an old person in the parking lot with a shopping cart and, you know, say a prayer for somebody if they need one. And, you know, he's a good human. He has a good heart.
That's because I think it probably has a lot to do with the fact that he had so much alone time with you because your ex-husband was traveling all the time, even though I know it sucked at the time. Like you're like, oh, I want you to be here to help or whatever, but it was probably beneficial. In his case, your son's
but
case.
Unfortunately, he didn't see and hear nearly everything. He still doesn't know even a half of it. He doesn't really acknowledge the book even, and he will never read it. But I appreciate and respect that because it might be better. It might be a good thing. They don't need to know everything. He doesn't need
to know. Yeah.
But that's what I love about him is his mature outlook. So, you know, he came out of it okay. And I am so much healthier. Again, read the book. You'll find out what happened to me physically. But, you know, I have put on a significant, you know, amount of that weight back on that I lost from being sick. I don't need my breathing machine anymore. You can still hear scratchiness in my throat, but you know, it's just something I'll have to live with, but I don't have symptoms every day. I'm actually feeling good and I'm not, you know, trudging through every day like I used to. And I'm remarried very happily to a longtime friend. And we actually have a healthy relationship because believe it or not, after 4 decades of trauma and abuse, this girl could somehow find somebody that is patient enough to get through it, you know, had a little therapy for the CPTSD. The writing the books has been tremendously helpful too, because to have to dive down to those places that I wish I didn't have to revisit, but to go back there, you know, deeply enough to explain it and relive it for the readers. It's definitely
there was a lot
helpful.
of detail. I was very surprised in the level of detail, you know, that you were able to recall even from so long ago. I was like, well, I don't know.
In trauma, you either remember every detail or you forget it all. But I have it's almost a curse though, because there were a lot of nights even going through therapy and stuff that I would ruminate and it would just replays and bothers you all over again. But no, life is good. And that's why I do this, because I think that people need to understand, one, you know, you don't have to be a victim of your circumstances. There's always another side of it. And if you can get out safely and if you want to get out safely, because not everybody wants out. My mother's a perfect example. Yeah. She's perfectly happy in her narcissist kingdom over there and we have no contact, but that's, you know, what she wants. But if you can get out, if you want out, there's so much more to life. You know, all the things that I wanted to do that I was held back from doing because God forbid I feel a sense of joy or achievement or success. I have done them all in the last few years. And, you know, again, I did not set out to, the last thing I wanted was to even date, never mind be married again. But we all want love in our lives. And he just waited and was patient and persistent about giving him a shot. So I did. And I'm so glad I did, because we just have this amazing life together and everybody deserves that. And, you know, even if I still, I think, have some codependent qualities, but I'm also me. I rediscovered who I was at the end of that last marriage. And I think that was necessary for me to heal so effectively.
Yeah. Well, I think you did a good job in the book too of, you know, you don't come off at all, and even definitely not now at all, as a poor, pitiful me kind of person. You projected a strength, I think, throughout the whole thing, which is really interesting too, because at the same time you're saying, you know, I feel worthless. I feel like nobody loves me. I feel like this, but then you're also so strong on the other hand, and you're able to, I feel like you kept your clarity somewhat for the most part. I think you kept the clarity about you throughout the whole, how long were you guys together? 25 years?
25 years. Yeah.
So I feel like you really kept a good, like somehow kept a really good head on your shoulders. And like, I know you wanted to leave many times that you wanted to leave. And there was always, you know, when COVID, I knew it was coming. I knew COVID was coming in that, you know, I'm looking at the dates and I'm like, oh God, she's not gone
You're
yet.
like, oh
God,
crap, she's not getting out.
I think I was at my boyfriend's house reading, and I got to that point where he said COVID, and I was like, oh, I knew it was gonna
Wasn't that the worst? That's how I felt when it happened, because
no.
I had just talked to the attorney and said, get me out. I'm done. I'm ready to file. Like, this was the one time.
Yeah, I was like, this.
And then COVID shut down.
Like, oh, and I thought, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
That's literally what I said in my house when it happened. It was Saturday at 5 p.m. literally March 21st. I'll never forget that day. I was like, the universe is just playing this terrible joke on me. Like, this is not funny though.
That's exactly what it felt like. That's exactly what it felt like. Yeah. So, but I'm so glad you were able to get out.
Yes, we're all glad
to be happy again. And what is the message? I think you already kind of said it, but there's hope. There's not at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe don't feel shame. I bet there's a lot of shame. I feel like when
there's a lot to say, but yes, thank you for saying that, because that's the one thing that kills me, because in whatever circumstance I'm in, whether it's a podcast, a book signing, people refer to themselves or even say to me, oh, you must feel so broken, or you must have felt damaged. And I have never, even in the worst cases that I was in, I never felt broken or damaged. I knew that, I struggled, you know, with a lot of things, as anyone would in that situation. But that did not reflect on who I was. That was something that was done to me. You know, just like if somebody, let's say, pinches you and, you know, your skin gets purple, that doesn't mean you have purple skin. That means just you were pinched in the skin, and now it's going to go back to how it was. It's going to heal.
How did you know that? Where did that strength come from?
Honestly, I don't know. People tell me I'm strong all the time, and I'm just not. And I don't know if it's because I was raised to think I'm nothing and not feel any sense of achievement, or maybe I am just that humble. I'm not even sure. But I think it was good that I had the foundation with my great grandma to know a different way, to know what love felt like, and to know what it should look like, and to know that what I was experiencing was not it. And I think, you know, you'll find when you read the prequel, because I even laughed at myself when I was writing it about my childhood, that as tiny and scrawny and little as I was that little girl that if I saw somebody getting picked on the playground, I would like, if you ever watch Tom and Jerry, it's like watching Jerry Mouse, like marching really, you know, on a mission to go tell Tom something or do. That was me. I would stand up to these bullies, and then I would get I was bullied a lot as a result too. But I think I just always had this fire in me about injustice and just, you know, rooting for the underdog. And so that's what I'm doing now, because I don't want anyone to ever feel, you know, any sense of diminishment, because, you the beauty of this world is that we all are who we are. And I don't want to hear people call themselves broken or flawed, or I don't even like the word disabled. You're just as able as anybody else. You can probably do things and are more able than I am at things, so I think we just have to stop with the labels and the stigmatism and just, how about we just celebrate who we are and be our authentic selves? And, if somebody thinks that I'm damaged or defective or, something's wrong with me, that's more a judgment of themselves than it is on me, because I know who I am now, and I'm not going to hide who I am now, and I'm not afraid to speak up, and I'm not going to be silenced anymore. So I'm going to speak for all of us.
That's
Yay.
I like cue the applause. I'll add that sound effect.
Okay, there you go.
No, I think that, your story is unique and not unique at the same time.
Right.
And I think you do a fantastic job of telling it, a fantastic job of explaining the why people stay. And I'm just so happy that you're on here to talk to me. I don't care about everybody else.
Well, I'm so happy too. And I thank I thank everybody.
This is the first time I've actually read somebody's book before interviewing them.
Oh my.
Because I've always wanted it to be a little more, I want to learn and have genuine reactions, as people are telling their story. But then afterwards, and I read the book after, and I'm like, oh, I wish I'd have mentioned this, or I wish I'd have brought up that. Or if I'd read it first, I would have known. So now I'm trying to make it a habit of reading it before the interview. And luckily I have the time now to, I'm booking things out that I have time to do that, where I didn't in the beginning. But so, yeah, I was like, how is this going to go? Because I already know so much of the story, and then we didn't even really get much into the book I read. We barely scratched that surface. So,
well, that's the thing. And that's the beauty of the book, is that there's so much to unpack, because there's a lot there. I mean, we could go into a whole other episode about being a mother in the midst of abusive circumstances and what that's like, not just trying to protect yourself, but protect your kid from whatever psychological or physical trauma. Because, I always joke with people, believe me, there is so much to this book. There's literally about 1,000 pages that didn't make it in the book, because I had so much content, but there's a lot of untold stories.
If there was that much in it, I don't think I could have gotten through it.
No, and that's the thing. Like, but we could even go into, I didn't even talk about, we had a bloodhound that was epileptic and would have grand mal seizures. So add that into it, because that went on for 6 years of this. Every 2 hours, she'd have a grand mal seizure, and she was on medications, and I was dealing with that and the sleeplessness of all that. And the things I could tell some stories about him with that dog, because he did not like that I loved that dog more than I loved him. We could get into, mental and physical, health is a whole other aspect, but there's so many parts to the story. But yeah, definitely the childhood, for both of us would be something that influences how we were as adults. And I think it is for a lot of people. And they do find that most victims of intimate partner abuse have had some kind of abuse during their childhood. So that's why they call it, that they keep the cycle going. It's an abuse cycle. But this time it stopped with me. I stopped the cycle. I'm done with it. There will be no more generational stuff either, because my son is not going to continue it, because God help me, there is no way that I'm going to have a narcissist child. I will not allow that. But no, he's in a serious relationship, for the first time as an adult, and she's a lovely and sweet girl, and we're very happy to have her. And I am a little attentive to her. I'm not going to lie, because it's always in the back of my head, how much did he get from his dad, by nature, of seeing it. But she's pretty happy. She says he's very loving and very, good to her and treats her right. And so, cross your fingers that I did good.
You did do good. I'm sure you did good. We could really go on and on and on.
I know.
I
know.
But at some point we have to stop. It was so wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your story on here and to the world in your book and your books. If you wouldn't mind, let me know when
absolutely
the next ones come out. I will absolutely read them.
You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram.
I'll do that.
And I post stuff every day and I post updates. So absolutely. Everybody on
Dana
social
Diaz,
media.
Or is it
Dana S. Diaz.
Dana S. Diaz. Okay. I will look you up.
So look me up. And yeah, absolutely. And thank you for reading my book, because I'm always appreciative that, I just, here's my humility again, but I'm just so appreciative that anybody even took the time to read anything that I've ever written. Never mind a whole book that I know is very big, but everybody says it's pretty quick to get through because they can't stop reading it.
You can't put it down. Yeah, you really can't. I mean, until you have to, because you're just because it really affects for me, I'm an empath, I think. So it's affecting my soul, So there were times I was just like, oh, this is so heavy. I need a break. I know.
I did that writing it, trust me.
Get some different kind of drama or something, but then I would pick it right back up. And then when I was done, I was like, when do I get to talk to her? Oh, that's too long. I have to wait for 2 weeks.
Anytime, lady.
I finished it 2 weeks ago.
I will email you. I will get it. Follow me. We'll message each other.
For sure.
And I say that for everybody too. I do have people message me on social media often or email me or whatever. I don't give my number to everybody, but I will give it to you because I don't mind the text either, because there are times when people will even people I know that I've known for years will just randomly be like, I know I finished the book a month ago, and they'll have a question and I'm like, okay, I gotcha. Let me explain.
Or be like, well, I'm taking the questions and I'm going to write another book and just read that book and you get all your answers.
Trying to answer them all. No, but I love it. I love that everybody's, the discussion, that all the things that are within this book, the discussion can go everywhere, but that's what we need it to create awareness, is to talk about it, and to relate to it. So it's a good thing. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And thank you. And I'm so happy for you now.
Thank you.
And I'm going to have to let you go.
I know it's that time, but thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We'll do another one, when your next book comes out.
Sounds like a plan.
I'll be back.
And awesome. A Taylor Swift concert.
Yes. Yes. That. As long as you're paying, because I can't afford those tickets.
Well, if everybody keeps buying books. All right. So that's our PSA. Please buy books so we can go to see Taylor Swift.
There you go. Buy books and yeah, I don't know, pay me for this podcast somehow.
There you go.
In case it wasn't made painfully clear, her book, Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse, is unbelievable. It is a great book. Highly recommend it. Go read it. Read her other books when they come out. Let's support Dana because she's amazing. Thank you so much for listening, and you can follow her on Instagram, danas.diaz.
I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to Without Regret, the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to ask you to please like and subscribe. Leave me a review wherever you get your podcast. That would be really awesome, because that's how my podcast is going to get noticed. So that would be a huge help, or share it on your social media would be awesome as well. Thank you so much. This podcast is a Without Regret production, which is produced by me. Artwork is by me. Everything's by me except for that theme song. That's by a guy named Michael Bruguglio. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Without Regret Podcast, and on Instagram at without_regret_podcast. Thanks again.